Welcome to today's webinar on DfMA. This is our second in a series on DfMA. This one's entitled The Quest for Efficiency. My name is John Tocci. I'm CEO of Tocci Construct and co-founder of the BIM Forum. And with me to moderate this morning and this afternoon is Jan Reinhardt, founder of Adept Project Delivery and Chair Emeritus of the BIM Forum. And we'll be co-guiding you through this conversation. We're delighted to have such a diverse group of experts joining us today to delve into this unsung topic that is beginning to reshape the construction industry. It's new, and it's also about 40 years old at the same time, and we'll be talking about that. Jan?
Yes. Good morning, good afternoon. Glad to be here. Thank you, John. So this is an exciting topic. We all had tasted some of design for manufacturing and assembly, and we are quite convinced about the power and the opportunity that is associated with that topic. And design for the manufacturing and assembly is all about executing work in the right sequence and not missing a step. We want to feed means and methods, knowledge and expertise into the design process so that we create globally optimal results. And this is not always the case in the traditional methods of project delivery that we are seeing here in the United States. We have seen on the projects that are being executed with design for manufacturing and assembly in mind, significant reductions in waste with significant potential for accelerating projects and cost reductions. And we would like to share our lessons learned, insights, and the opportunities that there is right in front of us. John.
So the first, if you missed the first one, it was October 26th. You might want to go back and see the first webinar on DfMA, and it was amazing. It was a robust conversation, and we're building on that. We're trying not to be duplicative of it, but we'll just show you a couple of slides from that to explain where we were and where we're going. Jan, this is your slide about from the first time. Yes.
This is a slide from a project that did not incorporate design for manufacturing and assembly methodologies. It was a traditional process. It was a mechanical room of a hospital, and that mechanical room was just full to the brim with things. The design was not validated for constructability. We barely fit all the pieces into the space. There is an inch and a half between the steel and the ductwork on the top, and it is way too close for comfort of a situation that was created here. It was barely constructible. It's not very well maintainable. If something needs to be repaired or exchanged, it will be a quite interesting situation. Design for manufacturing and assembly is almost like an insurance policy to avoid these situations. And these are just items that we have come across that made us believers, and this motivates us to hold this webinar. John.
So what does this have to do with DfMA? This is the version 1 of SpaceX's Raptor engine, rocket engine is on the left, and version 2 is on the right, more power, fewer parts. That's really what we're trying to do, simplify, make it practical, and make it serviceable. Before we go any further, we really need to introduce the panel. So I'm sorry for waiting so long, but Jan will introduce our diverse group of panelists, each bringing unique knowledge and perspective in construction and design. Jan?
Yes, very well. David Francis with Dome Construction is our first panelist, and David has seen it all. He has worked as a pipe fitter, as a foreman, as a project manager, as a plant manager, as a BIM VDC manager, and for large mechanical contractors, and now he's a construction executive at Dome Construction. And John and I, we were talking, and it seems like that David has been practicing for this webinar for the last 25 years. He is well qualified to teach us about design for manufacturing and assembly. Glad to have him here.
Are we going to introduce the rest of the panelists here?
John, do you want to introduce April Woods?
Well, yep, you surprised me a little bit. April is a principal at WSP, the Southeastern Division. She's a mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and systems expert, and we're really excited to have her here. So,
yeah. And we have Adam Davis, who is with Miller Electric as a senior manager for virtual design and construction, and is a shining star in the world of prefabrication and coordination. And then we have Victor SanVido with Southland Industries, and with a wealth of experience in project delivery, in coordination, in design for manufacturing and assembly. And we have a well-qualified panel here in front of us. So we have organized our work in some sections. The first one is to introduce what is DfMA and what does it mean to you, and also talk about the benefits. So what is it and what are the benefits? And we would like to start with David Francis to touch on these topics, and we would like to make this as colorful as possible to create a baseline understanding what we are talking about. David.
Awesome. Yeah, so my introduction to DfMA actually began when I've been very fortunate in my career. I started with a small mechanical contractor, and we did design build projects back then. We didn't call it DfMA, but it was. We just didn't know we were doing it ahead of time. We also, back in '86, we embraced CAD. We also we started doing 3D modeling in 1989. So our goal was designing and detailing for prefabrication, just wherever possible, always seeking ways to utilize our shop. You know, that was our target back then. I moved on to a larger firm, and I was hard to start a CAD detailing group there. They didn't have one. And we had an engineering department and detailing department, but they operated in silos. There was a big wall of them on one side and us on the others. And the pivotal moment there really came because we had a really sharp and progressive head of engineering. And he started utilizing the detailing for complex layout areas and like central plant projects. So that was kind of the first kind of time, you know, I said, okay, now we got some really things moving on here. Another mechanical contractor, despite the initial separation, we eventually united engineering and detailing and put them in one room. So now all of a sudden you cross-pollinated, you had that information going across. And that was a really big barrier to knock down. It really helped us a lot. You know, I also got the opportunity to become a fab shop manager there, and he introduced me to lean construction principles. You know, that just totally reshaped my understanding of material costs and fabrication processes. You know, our whole approach was just transformed from back to design and detailing by focusing on standardization, modularization. You know, we're looking for efficiency, you know, eliminate waste, you know, find value. This integration, you know, with our design, and first time we integrated design to fabrication. So it lowered our installed cost and showcased just the value of early stage collaboration. You know, and our first introduction to DfMA, like a lot of people, is we did modular bathrooms. That was the first time we had multiple trades working. You know, it was a challenge because now all of a sudden you had to deal with, you know, contracts and union labor rules. And, you know, but it was really important in just showing that, you know, if we break down these silos, we can advocate for this unified approach, you know. So, I mean, my real lessons learned on DfMA still is our industry is still fragmented by contracts and costs. We just silo things, which hinders DfMA. You know, but we can foster this collaboration, you know, between the design teams and trades, and get the advocate for the owners to drive for, you know, design for manufacturing and assembly principles. we dismantle these barriers, just paving our way for a cost-effective and streamlined project delivery. And the real benefit that people don't talk about is job site safety. That's the other thing you're looking for. So you can start loading your mod rates. So there's a lot of value to this that you have to look at it as a group versus individuals. With that, we'll pass it on to April.
Yes, thank you so much, David. So as mentioned in the intro, I'm April Woods and I'm representing the design community here on this webinar. I'm really excited to be part of this with these panelists and get different perspectives. I think one thing about DfMA in the design community is I think sometimes it's thought as something that squelches creativity for the designers. And I'd like to be here as part of the design community to say that it absolutely does not. Uniformity on inside of a project and inside of a building can be something that's really celebrated and can be used very uniquely and also very systematically to be able to get the best end product for the owner. What I have seen in doing a lot of DfMA in my projects is, first of all, engagement of the contractors early on in the project will build a lot of trust within the team. And within that trust, then DfMA can go a lot easier, a lot smoother. We've been part of so many projects, anywhere from, as David mentioned, bathroom pods, which have been around for quite a long time, but also prefabricated racks like I have shown here, where we maybe have multi-assembly of different disciplines all within one rack. And what that does is it allows us to work through a lot of the design kinks during design that could come up during construction. And it makes it for a better install, a better end product for the owner. And what is most important, potentially a schedule impact where we're able to pull up the schedule and get heads in beds earlier, specifically in a hospital, which is where I do a lot of my work, which gains revenue for our owners. So I think anytime where we can make more modularity within our designs, we should be doing that. It does not squelch the creativity of a building, but it just makes it more uniform and it makes it more constructible, which there's lies in savings for the owner and also construction schedule for the owner. Next, it's Victor, and he's going to give his perspective.
Thanks very much, April, and thanks very much for having me on this presentation, John. So from my perspective, what is DfMA? It's about right-sizing the loads, the equipment, the routing, the systems. It's about looking at designs that are sort of a one truck, one pick philosophy. And if you look at the picture number 6 over there, we're trying to make pieces that fit onto the one truck, and you can pick it in one shot. So you eliminate a lot of the field labor. But some of the things that have to happen, you have to make sure that you've got actually the right routing, that you've got all of your systems in close proximity so you can put them on a rack or you can put them on a riser. If you look at picture number 1 over there, that's basically a piece of ductwork the same size as a truck. And if we're putting that up at 4 feet sections, there's a tremendous amount of field labor involved. And you can see you've got a 56-foot piece of ductwork over there, but it has to be coordinated with a steel going in, and you've got to make it the same size as the bay spacings. If you look at number 2, that's 4 vertical risers, 3 floors high going in, but you've got to make sure it's been laid out that way in the building. So you have to be involved in this conceptual design or the schematic at the latest. Otherwise, you're going to create tremendous rework for everybody else who's already put the design together. Number 3 on the right is typical standard pump skid. And so 1, 2, and 3 are things you can do fairly easily because you're dealing with one system. Item number 4 over there is a process rack, and you can see the heavy steel in it. So you have to have a serious discussion with the structural designer. Are they going to decouple pipe supports and ductwork supports from the structure, or are they going to be integrated? Because that piece over there has to go up at the same time when the structure goes up. Number 5 down there, you can see there's basically 8 miles of pipe on trailers ready to go. for a 60,000 ton plant. And what that does is if you design those systems ahead of time properly, and you can get the right routing and layout, you can standardize those elements that go in, and you can dramatically cut the speed to get the work done. And picture 6 over there is basically a multi-trade rack. This is for a data center where we're seeing more and more of this because the work's being built in remote places and you can't attract labor. So we see a lot of this DfMA in the healthcare industry, which people have mentioned, in the process industry, manufacturing industries, data centers, and then in some cases on residential. And Adam, you're up.
All right. Thank you so much, Victor. And it's a great pleasure to be here to talk about such an important thing, DfMA. I have an experience similar to David where, our job is to feed a fab shop, and we've been trying to feed work into our fab shops in electrical for the last 15 years. It's kind of been one of my primary roles. And so DfMA just kind of became something that we were doing, but we never talked about it in that sense. And as we start having this term, we can start aligning efforts between, folks like April and David and Victor and myself on projects. That the early engagement clearly helps with getting efforts on board. And when you think about the physicality of systems like electrical, a lot of our lines, arcs, and circles for permitting don't enable some of that early collaboration with spatial awareness of electrical systems. So that's been something that I've had a challenge to try to bring some physical representation to those lines, arcs, and circles for years. And we've been successful in executing under IFOA agreements, under design build agreements, under design bid build agreements. You're seeing some pictures on the background here, and this is kind of a lessons learned through projects that had those specific agreements. And the pictures here are showing a project where we didn't even have that agreement, but we knew that there was a benefit in doing a modular design for manufacturing and assembly approach, and we were able to even drive it as a subcontractor. So again, this is something that I think a lot of us have done in abstract, but now we have some context, and we can all kind of have a rallying cry behind DfMA as an approach on projects. So thanks, and we'll kick it off to the next section.
So this is bucket number 2, and this gives me a chance to redeem myself from doing a lousy job of introducing April at the beginning. Okay, so it is going to be guided by April. She's Senior Vice President at WSP USA based in Orlando, Florida. She serves as the Florida Building Systems Director with a background as a professional engineer and lead accredited professional. April's dedication to sustainable design has been a guiding force throughout her illustrious career. Recognized for her outstanding contributions, April was honored as a recipient of the Consulting Specifying Engineers 40 Under 40 Award in 2012. Okay, that was a little bit better. And April also shows great discretion, because in our first conversations together, I suggested that DfMA could cut MEP engineers' fees. And if I was in the room, she would have hit me in the head, I think. So we're going to be talking about this, and she will address that topic as well. Just to lead this in, this is the often used McClamey curve, modified for DfMA. The industry has come to really be, I think, in Pat McClamey's debt for, confessing the obvious and showing us the way forward as far as putting more effort in the planning process, reducing more effort, more time, more cost into the planning process in order to eliminate changes and smooth construction and arrive at better outcomes later in the process. So that's what this is all about. That's what we're talking about. The next slide, April will handle this one.
All right. Thank you so much, John. And thank you for the take two, although I thought your first intro was great as well. So appreciate that. So the first thing I want to start off and talk about a little bit here is, how does this impact, how does DfMA really impact our process? And in putting together these slides, we wanted some simple graphics that kind of show when does DfMA make sense to be engaged in a project timeline. Now, what you'll see as this first timeline is we didn't even put up here just a traditional design, build, bid, build timeline. We hope that people are starting to go away from that. Although here in Florida, we still see that as sometimes a delivery method. But hopefully we are understanding that we are better together. The more that we can have the design and construction team interacting, the earlier on the project, the better. Now, this whole discussion today is not necessarily just geared towards IPD or design assist type contracts. However, there is an advantage to having that as part of your project contractually, or not even contractually, just doing an IPD light type project. So I would say the more that we can bring in a CM, a GC earlier into the project, the better, and that will really bring light to what DfMA elements may be appropriate for that building, for that building type, for the overall design process. One thing to emphasize, important in any process, is that there's owner buy-in and that the owner really buys in on the concept. So when are we bringing in the contractors? That's really important. When are we talking about what we are doing for DfMA and what are the ideas of that is really important. We found the most successful DfMA projects are the ones where that is decided literally at SDs. We're already talking about where are we going to have bathroom pods, where are we going to have head walls, where are we thinking about prefabricated racks. I've worked with Adam's group before on, are we going to have a whole prefabricated electrical room and what does that look like? And it's really important because that really can impress on the design in a very positive manner. So on the top one, you've seen just a traditional process. Maybe the subcontractors are brought in right at the end of CDs. Normally our BIM model is at an LOD 200. So it's not quite as detailed. So you're not in fabrication mode just yet because you still have to do a lot of the coordination process. But then during a DfMA process, you want to look on bringing the subcontractors on earlier so they can have impress into the design. Now, we will talk a little bit later about how there is a thought of too early in terms of actual drawing, the drawing design, because drawings are very iterative. The design process is iterative. But the earlier we can have the owner making decisions alongside the contracting team of what makes sense for the project, we have found that to be the most successful. And hopefully what you're seeing by this slide is that we are just sliding the efforts up. So as John mentioned in our first discussion, I talked about how there's still a lot of effort that the MEP engineer has to do throughout the process. It's just the effort, and when that occurs, it occurs at a different time that it would if we're doing DfMA and we're bringing contractors on earlier. And what this slide is also meant to show, if you look at the construction bar or the overall project bar, is that overall project timeline should be shortened doing DfMA and bringing the subcontractors on earlier. You're just creating a more collaborative team at an earlier time. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Victor, and he's going to talk more from his perspective of what are some of the implications of DfMA from his standpoint.
Thank you, April. I appreciate it. I would say the one thing that I'd like to pick up on from April is if you come into the room as a trade partner and you start drawing too soon, you're going to have a tremendous amount of rework. So what you have to do is you have to wait until the architecture is settled down, because that is an iterative process. And then you've got to wait and you've got to figure out, have you really got downshot air handling units so you straight into shafts, so you eliminate all the roof duct. You've got to get the design to where you have fewer pieces in it. If you've got a 2-duct system versus a 3, it's far easier to fabricate. So you've got to get the systems into the right format such that you can fabricate if you can meet the goals of the owner. In parallel, if you're looking at a hospital, We had one where the owner basically said, I want every single patient room same-handedness to eliminate medical errors. And so they had 500 rooms the same, identical. In that case, you've got a much bigger case for prefabrication. They had 47 operating rooms. There were 23 type A and 24 type B. When you have this kind of discipline with the owner, you really have a good chance to work now on designing for manufacturability. I think the other thing you've got to look at is module size and weight control program. When you pick big things, they don't tend to behave like when you're putting smaller pieces together. So you've got to have centers of gravity marked in all your modules. You're going to figure out what the right time to bring it in is. You may have to change your construction sequence and think about that. If you can have the steel erector put up your modules, it's a little bit earlier than others, but there is an awful lot of time and money to be saved by looking at this as one job to be executed. So when you design the construction process and how that steel is going to get assembled, if you can get some of your big stuff in at the same time, it's better for the overall job. Adam, would you like to give your perspective?
Yeah, Victor, I would agree with you. And we alluded to the electrical rooms, and that kind of challenged the amount of time we needed to coordinate that whole effort, right? We actually had a two-tier coordination effort to get out of the electrical room to release that earlier so that we could continue all of the other areas for coordination. So it does kind of change the sequence when you're looking at those larger items and how we integrate them. So I would agree with you. The healthcare industry has kind of dominated a lot of our experience inside of this, but we can't eliminate some of those larger pieces and parts that we see inside of the data centers or inside of other large infrastructure projects, because a lot of my experience is in the natural gas industry, and seeing all of these DfMA skids, I mean, that's just kind of the deployment method for a lot of those projects. So the scale, the timing, and the integration, I'm so glad April said there's a time where it's too early to bring a subcontractor in. Because as an electrical subcontractor, we always say, if you bring me in earlier, we can help. And then sometimes we're brought on too early and we just start churning our wheels. I saw that at a few other large scale projects that we did, is that we didn't even have a number of substations or a number of electrical room locations to find when we were bringing in electrical contractors to help coordinate early population models. And we ended up with a substantial amount of rework. So there is a timing effort where there's too early, there's a timing where it's too late, and then there's the sweet spot, which I think involves the DfMA process in that. David, what are your thoughts?
You're muted, David.
Sorry about that. Okay. Yeah, my thing really comes down to right-sizing things. What I've seen in design is everyone's got their book and we size everything per the book. And sometimes you got to throw the book away, because what we're trying to do is get a repeatable unit. And I've done a hospital where we went through, and fortunately, the GC was self-performing all the drywall, but we agreed on the floor. We made all the studs 6-inch studs. So now all of a sudden there was the money you spend on trying to decide how thick walls are and RFIs and all that stuff, trying to thicken walls, all that labor spent, the material's immaterial at that point. We used to do this with plumbing stacks. We have a whole floor of plumbing waste stacks there, and you have 4 and 3 inch. Well, why not just make them all 4 inch? Now they're all typically identical. You're eliminating the labor and the thought process of people have to make this negotiation, put this here or here. It doesn't matter. It'll work all over. You try and look at things. We standardized, I remember we standardized plenum lengths. It was one of my problems I had with my detailers, is because they could custom build plenums on the end of VAV boxes. And I said, no, we're going to make them on 1, 2, 3, or 4 foot increments. So when you start looking at things and thinking about that way, you can start modularizing design and controlling things, and getting your designers to think a little bit outside the box and say, you can right size these things for design, for fabrication versus the cost on the design, and the cost of material, everyone gets caught up with it, but they don't realize the labor that is spent sometimes negotiating all these little oddball things. And I think that's kind of one of the influences. It's trying to get that design team to get them to kind of think a little bit outside the box and not stare at their little book of sizing.
That's great. Jan, you're muted.
Okay, I'm not the only one.
No, how about now?
That's good. Yep.
Okay, very good. So the next question, or the next bucket of topics here, is about cost. And cost in two ways. We need to be honest to ourselves. It costs money to do the right thing. And what is the cost to implement DfMA? And then conversely, what is the cost of not doing it? And I'm wondering if we can take a look at all that I mentioned, at real cost, at schedule, at material, at risk, at possible confusion and problems on the job site. So I'd like to ask David to talk to us about what's the cost of doing DfMA and what's the cost of not ignoring the topic.
Yeah, at the end of the day, we're all businesses, and we're all siloed businesses. So we're all business units. And the thing is, how do we share this gain or share this loss? And that's usually kind of the challenge that comes along. Unfortunately, over the years, we've cut down fees on designers. We've just kind of restricted, but these are the people that really need to be compensated to do the work up front. And if you do this work up front and it's done correctly, now all of a sudden they're not doing as much work. There's less RFIs. There's less work they have to do on the construction side. So you see that stuff up front there. You're really trying to hunt value. That's just a typical lean principle. And when you're not doing these things, it's kind of funny. Everyone has an estimate and stares at this cost here, but no one really acknowledges all the extra costs to not do it. And it's really generalized by RFI and just wasted time asking questions. If you have to stop and ask someone a question about it, that's waste. We call it lost time. Anytime you are not heading straight down the road, it's lost time. We used to track it. We used to back charge for it. That's how we used to do it. So I think that's really kind of the thing to look at a DfMA situation is the thing I see a lot is when people are making money, they don't see a reason to change. They think things are going good. And it's like, no, we're making money. But the question is, how much money are you leaving on the table by not making these changes and possibly improving your process? And you have to change. If you don't change, you're going to die off. Just kind of, it's the way contracting has worked over the years. We've seen some big contractors go down, but we've seen other contractors evolve with the situation. So I think that's kind of how I see, understanding the cost of DfMA. And like I said, what's the cost of not doing it? April, what's your feelings?
Yep. Yeah, no, I think that's really great, David. So I look at it from an owner's perspective. The other time we can shorten the schedule for an owner, we will be able to help them start building revenue quicker. And that is regardless of building type, right? So I think there is a lot of pressure right now in the design and construction industry to move the needle quicker and quicker. And we've got a lot of new tools. We've got Revit, we've got BIM, we've got all the collaboration. Now we have more integration of the contracting team that is allowing us to actually push the needle in this direction. And I think DfMA is a very powerful tool, procedure, process, whatever you want to call it, that is really important to helping to reduce that schedule impact to owners. In addition to what I would like to say as a design engineer is our designers could really benefit from the input of contractors earlier in terms of learning more about how they could better their designs. We really need to work together to learn, the famous means and methods. That needs to be gone with the past. We need to have our design engineers and our architects become smarter at how we're doing design. And I do believe, even DfMA aside, just early engagement of a contracting team can really help and press on that. I think it's really important as we're building high performing buildings that the more all of us know about what each other does will help make a better product for our owner. So getting out of our silos of I'm just the mechanical engineer. No, I need to know exactly what the pipe fitter is up against and what their role is. So I think it's really important for moving this forward for our owners, which should be kind of the top of our mind. And I really like what David had to say about, like, it doesn't matter if it's a 4-inch pipe or a 3-inch pipe. Like, let's start to simplify some of the design in order to avoid confusion. The other big benefit that we haven't really talked about yet is DfMA really helps with safety on the site. And that's important not just to the contracting team, but also the design team. I go to job sites every single week and I'm walking on job sites, and the safety for myself and my team is a top priority. And I think the more that we can integrate where that labor is being done, the better, and where we can be taking that off site, that produces a safer job site. So I think with all of those proponents, the cost is huge actually of not doing it, because you are already falling behind. And if you're not doing this yet, make it a goal to have that be part of your next project and start to investigate how you can implement it. Because as David said, this is coming, just like every other thing is coming. AI is the way of the future too. I'm sure that will have a lot of impression on DfMA, and it'll be exciting to see how it kind of changes the construction industry years to come.
April,
So
that
with
was
that,
remarkable for you saying that the design community can learn a lot from the contracting community and from the trade contractors. That wouldn't have been said a couple of years ago, probably. And the fact that this is a thought and the realization also is a huge step.
yes, I think so too. And if all the contractors that are listening to this on the phone, if they could stop using the phrase "I'm just a dumb contractor," because I actually don't think most of the contractors I meet are a dumb contractor. And I hope everybody that is listening from the design community is open-minded to the fact that the contractors, no matter if they're a laborer or all the way up to a project manager or an SVP for their firm, that they have something valuable to say, and that could really impact the overall construction of a project that could be very positive for an owner. So I think people being open-minded to ideas is very important.
Yeah, April, just to hammer that point home a little bit, I just had a tool manufacturer coming in to learn about our process and how they can help. And I also had a vendor come in that supplies materials, and they both said the number one place they find innovation is on the job site. I mean, that is where the innovation, if you're seeking it, happens there. Now we're starting to pull some of that into our shops with the hands-on, but it's not, again, that's a lot of the innovation. The schedule is a big deal, and what I've heard a lot from clients is the schedule certainty that happens when you start looking at DfMA is also a thing. It may or may not be much shorter. It may be some small amount, but the amount of certainty they have with the schedule when you start implementing tools like DfMA, where you're simplifying and you're not creating a new jig in the fab shop that takes more time and effort. And these things require some level of sophistication from your subcontractors when you're asking them to provide that information and you're asking them to get involved earlier, or you say, I'm going to deliver a prefab electrical room and I have to understand how to structurally make it sound and integrate with the overall structural design. You're asking from a level of sophistication. So understand that every contractor has value and can execute this to some varied degree. You saw some basic wall panels. But up into the level of a fully prefabricated and modularized electrical room, you have different levels of sophistication. So just wanted to touch on that.
That's great.
I'll throw a little bit more. April, you talked about safety. About 10 years ago, we looked at our safety record in the shop versus in the field. And we found that projects that used significant prefabrication, we had 10 times fewer incidents on those projects than if you stick built it. However, if you're involved in too late most designers are trained to design stick-built solutions, not modular solutions. So it's, I don't know what the gap is now, but in terms of speed, if you look at the bigger jobs, you'll see a bigger gain in speed because you have more people in the train. A small project, it's a one person in, the next person in, so you don't see that much different. But if I look at a bigger project, they typically run about 10,000 square feet a week per trade through an area. And we've been able to approach 44,000 feet a week. So you can do an acre a week when you're well organized. The challenge happens is you'll get the steel person running at that speed, the mechanical, and pick another trade. And then you'll have two other trades that were purchased differently, brought on late, and they're doing it by hand, old school. And they drop down to 5,000 feet a week or less. And then the contractor says, bring more people on the job, and they don't have more material, and they just block up the workplace. So the whole job doesn't benefit from this. You have to have every single trade committed to working at a certain speed. I think on the other side, on the quality side, one of our superintendents told me he loves prefab because when he brings new people in, he gives everybody an equal chance to do high quality work because it's organized much better. And then when you're building away from home, or you've got to travel labor in, you're paying labor attraction and retention money to folks, or you're building in a downtown site that's congested, you don't have enough room for parking. So if you can modularize stuff, you can get the work going much better without all the traffic around an operating hospital or whatever that function might be. And if you've got Accelerate, you can put 2 shifts in the shop a whole lot easier than 2 shifts on the job.
I have one question for the panel. Have there been any instances where something went really wrong with DfMA? Are there certain risks that we need to watch out for? Geometrical precision and so forth. David, it seems like that resonates with you. Is that something? Do we have any experiences in that field?
Yeah, well, every job's got its own challenges, and we spend a lot of time scheduling and planning. That's really that's construction in a nutshell. Okay, we're all professional gamblers, and we're trying to schedule so we're going to land on the right side at the end. That's our goal, right? And what happens on certain jobs, you get involved and you have the best intentions. I mean, I was on an IPD project, but we had one guy who was working remote and he wasn't face to face. So he just wasn't a team player. And as much as we try and convince him to move things that it's best for you and it's best for the team, he didn't care. All he knew was, here's my budget. This is what I have to draw, and I can't beat my budget. So he wasn't embracing the whole philosophy of what the value is, bringing everyone together and trying to do that. I think that's part of, you have to have the right attitude to play this game. You really do. And it's getting the right team, the right players that are ready to move on to the next level. I mean, right? Because I just remember going from hand drafting to CAD. That was a big step, and everyone thought that was crazy. And then we started drawing 3D, and things, you just see things progress over, as new technologies come along. Like Adam mentioned, we learn things in the field. It's like going, wow, let's do this and make it a repeatable unit. And I think that's kind of how these things happen. So there's some designers that are obviously think you're trying to take our work, but they're not really trying to take your work. We're trying to make you better at what you did. I mean, when I started, you didn't really change the designer's drawings. You drew what you did what they did because they had time to draw it too. I think the problem with CAD that's come along is now everyone thinks everyone can flip a drawing around in a week. And no one accounts for it. There's still time spent to investigate and do all the proper things required for designing. I mean, it takes time. And I think part of it, when we talk about cost factors, you've got hourly people and you got people with salary. So, some people, I used to watch our designers work like dogs all weekend. And meanwhile, we've got our detailers going home on Friday, and say, well, can this guy come on Saturday? I said, yeah, but it's time and a half. So all of a sudden, well, we're not going to pay that. So then we make this, make this designer just spend the whole weekend drawing it because he was cheaper cost labor. So that's the kind of stuff that it's always going to be this challenge in this thing. It's still, when all the young kids came in, they think BIM's cool and 3D CAD is cool. I go, it's a business. You have to understand it. Everything's got a cost. And it's great. You're only $15 an hour right now, so we're going to use you a lot more. But when you get up to this schedule, all of a sudden you're 50 or $60 an hour. We're going to be a little more hesitant about how we use you. And I think that's kind of applies to DfMA, because at the end of the day, every one of our design members and all the trade partners are a cost module.
That's
how
great.
to group them all together. And I think that's going to be
That's
the
great,
real
David.
challenge, and how to get an owner to buy into that.
That's
And
great.
understand the value on the back end, because that's what people don't see is here's this black box. And that's what problems with computers is. It's a black box of information. How to get on the back end. We're going to see the payoff in the back end. Here's our big gamble, right? That's what it
And
is.
we don't uncover all of these things unless we talk to each other, right?
Communication's key.
This is when the value is being created.
That's right.
I would say the biggest risk on these, of things going really bad, is not understanding tolerances of the other systems.
Yeah.
You know, so
Yeah.
depressed floor slabs on bathroom pods, when you've got to pull the bathroom pod against the outside window, decoupling the vertical riser connection through the pods. You know, there's a whole bunch. You've got to give yourselves out, because what is designed is sometimes a little bit off in construction by 3, 4, 5 inches. So how do we make things fit?
CAD is perfect and field is not, right? That's the problem. You have these
That's
perfect
right.
straight walls, flat concrete. No one understands about camber and steel. I mean, the field is not perfect.
Yep.
And that's usually the biggest challenge, is how to put tolerances in your design and in your prefabrication. That's a great point, Victor.
This is great. We just hit a gusher. So we could keep talking on this topic for about another 30 minutes, but we got to move on to tangible recommendations. David, I really loved the way you touched on the culture aspect. People have to have the right attitude. It reminds me of Peter Drucker's statement that culture eats strategy for breakfast. In the end, all of this really comes down to teams and people being humble enough to invite players in and participate in their process, where they used to be siloed alone. So there's a lot
of herding cats, because that's really what it is. And it's how to herd a bunch of cats. And I mean, even in your own department, I mean, you know, I had 80 guys in my last group there, and you got union, non-union, blue collar, white collar, designers, detailers in the fab shop, and you're trying to herd cats. And now you start adding people from other companies. It's just this constant challenge in our industry.
It's great. So on that topic, what are our tangible recommendations for how to pull this thing off, how to make DfMA work and return results in quality and safety and time and quality of life too? Can we build harmony better on our teams? So we're going to turn to Victor first on his recommendations for.
Yeah, I would say maybe 3 items. Number 1 is select the team in conceptual design or schematic design at the latest, because 75% of the project cost is fixed at the end of schematic. If you bring people in later, all you're doing is creating rework. So and you need people with demonstrated experience. Number 2, design the way you're going to assemble the building, as well as designing the building shape and function. Number 3 would be reward prudent risk taking. And I think each project team needs to be able to take some risks without fear of it costing their company a lot of money. So, you know, look towards the IFOA contracts, cost pluses. That's where you'll see the innovation in the field.
Victor, could you just explain number 2 a little bit more? Your second.
Design the assembly as well as the building.
Yeah.
So if you look, say, at a data center, the typical or a building, you typically would put the structure up, put the roof on, and then fit everything inside. Perhaps you want to set all the heavy mechanical skids on the first floor and then put the steel around it, because steel is such a small part of, say, a process or a data center. It may be much more significant in a high-rise building. So why do we erect one trade at a time rather than erecting all the things that go on the floor? If you look at how people build computer chips, they build them in layers, not like we build buildings. So what can we learn from them?
That's great. That's great. Adam, and can we show a couple of his slides? He's got some great examples in the background while Adam comments and offers his recommendations.
Yeah, I like how Victor said that. I usually just look at a work breakdown on the project and it matching how we've actually designed. One of the biggest struggles with electrical is that we have to get A to B in order to power up systems. And if that A to B connection is in the middle of a sequence of construction, then those things are out of sequence and out of order, and they don't add up to a well-oiled machine to build these blocks together. So I struggle with that all the time. And in those early schematic design phases, it's good to understand how those interconnected systems work. And in 2D, you can accomplish that very, very easily. One lesson learned, and this is, again, we can give recommendations based on what we've learned, is those tolerances, Victor, that you've said. These are also other pieces and parts that may or may not be in your scope, but you're connecting into those scopes. So electrically, we connect to a lot of these other modular systems or pieces that that designers have chosen for DfMA. And what we've always found is the earliest I can get my physical eyes on this thing, the more reliable I can plan for the acceptance of that item. So that's something that I've failed in the past because we thought we'd just take the submittal drawings on this component and use it as a connection point. But if we would have just spent the time to send someone down there for a day, have a quick overnight on the hotel and back, which seems like an unnecessary cost, it really would have saved us. So again, physical eyes and ears on these DfMA components and your connection points. I mean, that's something I've learned the lesson on, and I'll always do in the future.
That's incredible. That's great. That's great. April, your recommendations.
Yeah, definitely. So I just want to go back to something I said earlier, and the most important player of the whole thing is really the owner, getting them bought into the process, getting them bought into a high performing team really early on is important. I think it's also great because you can, when the right team is at the table, then you can show the power of the team very early on. And as we all know, especially with big mega projects, trust amongst the team is very important. I would say that even with your smallest project. But for a very long-term project, you need to have a lot of trust between all the players. So I think the more you can show the expertise early on of the entire team, the better. I appreciated Adam's comment about how sometimes bringing some of the detailers in too early isn't beneficial, and I completely agree. I mean, until the building really forms into what it needs to be, it could be premature, but it's bringing in stakeholders like Adam to bring a thought process early in design and early to the owner of, hey, why don't we look at prefab electrical rooms on this project? This makes sense. It's bringing the mechanical contractor early on saying, hey, what do we think about maybe not having the central plant located here? Maybe it needs to be located over here because this makes more sense for this reason. And so showing some of that, even like the conceptual of the building help to form that then makes the DfMA process even easier and better once we get into really how the elements are drawn and then eventually constructed. I really like the thought and the discussion around we need to draw what is actually going to be installed. And there's a lot of power into that. So I think it's finding that sweet spot in the project. But I think the more you can woo and wow your owner early on in the project of the team and what we can bring together as an entire design and construction team can be really powerful. And it really shows our ability not only to collaborate, but our investment to them in terms of the schedule and the cost of the project.
That's wonderful. Very well said, April. These are great closing remarks, and this brings us to the end of this webinar. But before we part here, it has been an absolute pleasure listening to all of these things. The one thing that I'm taking away from here is that we can do a lot more than what we think we can do. And these were great specific examples of opportunities that we can tap into. One thing that I've learned from you today is that within each of your organizations, you're very efficient and you can optimize a lot of things, but there seems to be a huge potential in involving the owner and creating that conversation across organizations, across disciplines, between design and trade organizations. That is really something that we are not capitalizing on right now. One thing that is also important is, in an ideal situation, we would have a form of agreement, an integrated form of agreement. But even on bread and butter type of arrangement, design and construction projects, we can do a lot more if we pick up the phone and talk to each other. I learned this, and we are not doing enough of that, and we can start with these things today. And there's also one last thing that I've written down. Then there are real opportunities for informing the design about means and methods without having the design commit to means and methods. And traditionally, the design community stays away from that. It appears to me that this is shifting, and that there is awareness about the waste by not learning and educating ourselves about how things are being constructed and creating informed designs. John,
Great.
any
Jan,
thoughts on your side?
Yep. Well, there's some questions that have been posted on the chat that I think are really quite good. I know we only have 4 minutes left, but Tom Sinevich, hello, Tom from MBBJ. He's got a question, say, can you reflect on how trade union towns react to DfMA? And then he's got a second question that you can be thinking about. We can squeeze it in here. Healthcare programs evolve faster than we can build. How do you plan in DfMA for the required changes that clinicians require to accommodate cutting edge treatments? Those are probably 2 webinars right there in themselves. But
so I'll hit the trade one straight on. We did it in Philadelphia, San Francisco, and all of the places that traditionally you say trade wouldn't do it, and that's how we do business.
That's great. How about healthcare? You can't buy equipment at the beginning of a project.
So what we try to do is to try to identify the heating and cooling systems for them. Are they you're going to use house air or process cooling water? You can design capacity and don't even pick it until it's time.
Got it.
From a mechanical, that's only one perspective.
Adam, you too?
Yeah, same thing. Build the capacity into the system that you're designing and planning for. And I agree with Top. I saw DfMA, very successful in Akron in 2009. I mean, this is happening. There's always going to be resistance to change. But then I see another question from Julia about how do we get owners to start thinking about this, right? Because it's a key, like April said, to have the owner involved.
Yep.
What I've found is the construction industry is a show me industry. You tell them all about it, that's great. But if you have an owner that you're working with that you think there's a benefit on, and there's another project that you think there's a benefit in showing what you've done, I mean, put together a case study. I've done it on prefab to sell internal prefab to our company. Show me is the kind of the credo I follow when asking people to think differently. Here's why, a lot of information, and then show me. That'd be one recommendation I can give to Julia.
I think the other thing I'd put in there is one of the things everyone talks lean, talks pull plans, but it's pretty rarely they execute pull plans. It always is a push industry. We all start with a pull plan, then all of a sudden, what happened? Well, we're going to push concrete up a month. Okay, so all of a sudden everyone just goes sideways. And I think those are kind of the things that DfMA, if you ever read the Toyota Way and you look at these kind of books, their success is on design. They spend so much time on design, they have minimal changes after the fact. We have, unfortunately, Adam, we have a show me place where people want to see show pipe. They want to see steel up. The owner wants to see it. He doesn't want to look at his cute little 3D model. He wants to see structure. He wants to see walls. And that's where I see these things always kind of fall sideways. You can spend all this time doing great design. I mean, I don't know how many times I've done a CGMP job, and for some reason we start putting walls up, and I go, you realize how much the cost of this pipe is? And every time I have to make a change for this. So this is stainless steel pipe, and you guys are worried about a couple friggin' walls, okay? Can we make the negotiation? But when you find out the GC is doing the drywall, it doesn't matter, okay? It's driven by their costs and not everyone else's costs. So life's a negotiation, and DfMA's got the same wrestling match everything else does. And I think you guys mentioned it, communication up front. Let's get with the owner. Let's talk about the opportunities here. Present it that way and sell it that way. And really, if we can start getting design teams to start talking that way, because they're kind of the first line of defense when the architect never gets there. It's not, the subcontractors see the benefit, but man, if you get the design teams up front there talking about, man, we'd like to get these guys involved because we see some other opportunities here. I think that's where you could probably buy the value.
Right. So we need to wrap this up, but as a follow-up, the next DfMA 3 should really focus on the most important player, which is the owner. And I'd love to have everybody think about and point out examples where an informed and enlightened owner has guided the team, enabled the team, and sometimes pulling the cats apart from each other and getting them focused right. I know each one of you has stories of enlightened owners that are just incredible. So thank you very much, everybody. Jan, do you want to say the closing prayers here?
Thank you, everyone. I'm very excited. Bringing all of this together is a learning experience for me. Hopefully it was a learning experience for all of you and the audience. It was phenomenal, fantastic. I have taken a lot of notes here for my own practice and for everyone else. And thank you for being with us. And we'll see each other soon in one of the next webinars. Thank you.
Until we meet again.
Thanks, everyone.
Great job, everyone.
All right. Thank you.